Part 1. The Wounds of the West. The sun in the territory of the late 1870s was not a gentle thing. It was a hammer, beating down on the cracked earth of Dusty Creek until the very air shimmered with a heat that promised no relief. Dust, the color of rust and bone, was the town's lifeblood and its curse. It coated every warped plank of the saloon, settled in the bottom of every whiskey glass, and clung to the lungs of every soul unfortunate enough to call this place home. For Eliza Carter, it was the grit under her fingernails and the taste of shame in her mouth. At 20, Eliza had the kind of weary beauty that the West carved into its women-high cheekbones shadowed by hardship, eyes the color of a stormy sky, and a mouth that had forgotten the easy shape of a smile. She moved through the town's single, sorry street with her gaze fixed on the ground, a habit born from years of avoiding the venom in the eyes of her neighbors. They looked at her and saw not a young woman, but the ghost of a sinner. They saw the daughter of Abraham Carter, a man whose love for a deck of cards had ended with the tightening of a rope and whose death had left an indelible stain on his only child, Carter's girl. They'd whisper, the words dripping with a self-righteous contempt, rotten fruit from a rotten tree. Her days were a relentless cycle of seeking work that did not exist for her. She'd offer to scrub floors, mend clothes, or bake bread, only to be met with a slammed door or a cold, dismissive shake of the head. Today was no different. Mrs. Gable, the baker's wife, whose face was as plump and pale as her underproofed dough, had all but shooed her away with a broom. "We don't need your kind of help." She'd sniffed, clutching her crucifix as if Eliza carried the plague. Defeated, Eliza made her way to the general store, the coins in her pocket feeling pitifully light. There was just enough for a small sack of flour and some beans to feed herself and her younger brother. Danny. The thought of Danny, with his bright, hopeful eyes still untouched by the town's poison, was the only thing that kept her from crumbling. She was his shield, his only family since their mother had faded away like a prairie flower in a drought 2 years prior. As she pushed open the creaking door of the store, the familiar wave of condemnation washed over her. The men loafing by the Cracker Barrel fell silent, their eyes following her every move. Mr. Silas, the proprietor, merely grunted in her direction, not bothering to greet her. She gathered her meager supplies, her movements quick and precise, desperate to finish her transaction and escape the suffocating judgment. It was then that the bell above the door chimed again, and a different kind of silence fell over the store. It wasn't a silence of contempt, but one of awe and wary respect. Cole Maddox filled the doorway. At 30, Cole was a man forged by the unforgiving land he commanded. He was the owner of the sprawling Maddox Ranch, a cattle empire that was the only reason a place like Dusty Creek still clung to life. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in dusty leather and denim that had seen more miles than any man in the room. A low-slung holster held a formidable Colt, and his face, weathered by sun and wind, was a study in harsh lines and controlled power. But it was his eyes that held everyone captive. They were the color of dark whiskey, sharp and missing nothing. Yet they held a profound, private sorrow that no one dared to ask about. He was a legend in Dusty Creek, a man of immense wealth, untamed spirit, and a past shrouded in rumors of gunfights and lost love. He strode to the counter, his spurs ringing softly on the floorboards, and the crowd of loafers parted for him like the Red Sea. He didn't seem to notice Eliza either, who stood frozen by the flour sacks, feeling impossibly small and insignificant. Silas. Cole's voice was a low baritone, rough like gravel but carrying an undeniable authority. "Load up my wagon, the usual." "Right away. Mr. Maddox, right away," Silas stammered, his earlier gruffness melting into an obsequious scramble. Cole's gaze swept the room, indifferent and assessing, until it briefly snagged on Eliza. It was for less than a second, a fleeting glance, but she felt it like a physical touch. There was no pity in his eyes, no judgment, Nothing at all. It was a blank, unreadable look that was, in its own way, more unsettling than the open hostility she was used to. He turned away, his attention already on the horizon visible through the grimy window. Eliza paid for her things and fled, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't understand why that brief, empty glance from a man like Cole Maddox had shaken her so deeply. It was the feeling of being seen, perhaps by someone whose opinion actually mattered, and being found utterly unremarkable. The sky had been a searing, cloudless blue all day, but as Eliza hurried home, a change began to stir on the western horizon. The air grew heavy and still, charged with an unnatural energy. A bruised, yellowish tint bled into the blue, and the distant mountains began to disappear behind a rolling wall of brown. A sandstorm. And it was coming fast. The wind hit first, a sudden, violent gust that stole her breath and tore at her skirts. It carried the sting of sand, whipping it into her eyes and hair. Panic seized her. Her small, dilapidated cabin on the edge of town was still a 10-minute walk away. The street emptied in an instant as people bolted for cover, slamming doors and shuttering windows against the coming onslaught. Within moments, the world dissolved into a maelstrom of roaring wind and blinding, swirling dust. Day turned to a suffocating twilight. Eliza could barely see her own hands in front of her face. She pulled her thin shawl over her head, bent low against the gale, and pushed onward, each step a battle. The wind howled like a banshee, its voice swallowing all other sounds. She stumbled, her foot catching on an unseen rock. Crying out, she fell to her knees, the coarse fabric of the flour sack breaking her fall but scraping her hands raw. The wind ripped the shawl from her grasp, sending it spiraling into the brown chaos. Her hair lashed across her face, blinding her. Well, look what the storm blew in. The voice was slurred, ugly, and terrifyingly close. Through the haze of sand and hair, she saw a figure loom over her. It was Jedediah Finch, a disgraced ranch hand known for his cruelty and his love of cheap liquor. His face was a mask of grime and malice, his eyes gleaming with a predatory light. "Lost little bird," he sneered, his breath a foul wave of whiskey and rotting teeth. "Leave me alone, Jedediah." Eliza scrambled backward, her voice a thin thread against the roar of the wind. He laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Now why would I do that? The whole town shut its eyes. No one to see, no one to hear." He took a step closer, his intent sickeningly clear. "They all say you're trash. Carter's girl, time you started acting like it." He lunged, grabbing her arm in a crushing grip. Eliza screamed, but the sound was devoured by the storm. She fought back, kicking and scratching with a desperate fury, but he was too strong. He dragged her toward the narrow, dark alley between the blacksmith and the livery stable, his laughter mingling with the wind's shriek. Fear, cold and absolute, flooded her veins. This was it. This was the dark, ugly end the town had always expected for her. Suddenly, another shape materialized from the swirling dust, larger and more solid than Jedediah. A voice cut through the storm, low and cold as steel. "Let her go." Jedediah froze. Turning his head, Cole Maddox stood there, a silent, menacing specter in the heart of the storm. His face was unreadable, but his hand rested lightly on the butt of his Colt. It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. "Maddox," Jedediah spat, though his bravado was gone, replaced by a nervous tremor. "This ain't your concern. Just having a bit of fun with the town tramp." Cole took a slow step forward. The air around him seemed to crackle, a quiet, dangerous energy that had nothing to do with the weather. "I said," he repeated, his voice dropping even lower, each word a chip of ice. "Let her go." For a moment, Jedediah's drunken rage warred with his instinct for self-preservation. It was a short, one-sided battle. With a curse, he shoved Eliza away from him, sending her stumbling against the rough wooden wall of the alley. He gave Cole one last hateful glare before melting back into the storm. Eliza was left trembling, her breath coming in ragged sobs. The terror receded, leaving behind a nauseating wave of shock and humiliation. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold herself together. Cole moved toward her. He stopped a few feet away, his imposing frame shielding her from the worst of the wind. The silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the storm's fury. She expected him to leave, to turn his back and disappear as quickly as he had come. Men like him didn't get involved with women like her. Instead, he took another step.
"Are you hurt?"
he asked, his voice losing its icy edge, replaced by a gruff concern. She couldn't find her voice. She just shook her head, not daring to look at him. She felt his gaze on her, and, for the first time, she wished the ground would swallow her whole. To be seen like this, disheveled, terrified, and utterly pathetic by him. Of all people. He let out a sigh, a sound of weary impatience. Then he did something that stunned her. He reached out and gently took her arm, his touch surprisingly careful. "Come on, I'll see you home." His hand was large and calloused, the hand of a man who worked the land. Yet his grip was anything but harsh. He led her out of the alley, his body a bulwark against the wind. He found her lost shawl half buried in the dust and handed it to her without a word. He retrieved her spilled flour, brushing it off with a practiced economy of motion before tying the sack closed. He walked beside her through the dying storm, the wind gradually losing its bite. He didn't speak, and she was grateful for the silence. When they reached the small, leaning cabin she called home, he stopped at the door. The dust was beginning to settle, and in the strange, amber light, she finally looked up at him. She was prepared for the coldness, the indifference she had seen in the store, but it wasn't there. For the first time, she saw past the hard, rugged exterior of the wealthy rancher. In the depths of his whiskey-colored eyes, she saw a flicker of something else, a gentleness, a deep-seated empathy that was so unexpected it stole her breath. It was as if he was looking not at the sinner's daughter the town saw, but at her, at the frightened woman beneath the layers of shame. It was a look that acknowledged her pain. The moment was fleeting. His expression hardened again, the mask of the untouchable Cole Maddox slipping back into place. "Stay inside until this passes completely," he said, his tone once again gruff and impersonal. And with that, he turned and walked away, a tall silhouette swallowed by the last vestiges of the storm. Eliza stood at her door for a long time, one hand pressed to her cheek, the other clutching the mended sack of flour. The next day, the town was buzzing. The story, twisted and embellished by the venomous tongues of Dusty Creek, spread like wildfire. They didn't speak of a rescue. They whispered of a clandestine meeting in a storm, of Cole Maddox and the Carter girl in a dark alley. The one act of kindness she had received in years had become just another reason to condemn her, another nail in the coffin of her reputation. She was more of an outcast than ever. But as she faced the renewed waves of cold shoulders and hostile glares, it wasn't the town's hatred that occupied her thoughts. It was the memory of a brief, startling moment in the amber twilight, the feeling of a calloused hand offering support, and the shocking, disarming gentleness she had seen in a rich cowboy's eyes. Part 2. A scar on the heart and a turning point. The sandstorm had scoured Dusty Creek clean, leaving behind a sky of impossible clarity and a world that felt raw and exposed. For Eliza Carter, the feeling was more than metaphorical. In the days that followed, the whispers that had once been confined to shadowed corners now followed her in the open glare of the sun. The story of her encounter in the alley with Cole Maddox had been twisted into a sordid tale of seduction and sin. She was no longer just the gambler's daughter. She was a fallen woman, a schemer who had used the cover of a storm to ensnare the town's most powerful man. The invisible walls around her grew higher and thicker. Doors that had been merely closed before were now bolted. When she walked by the saloon, the men's leering comments were louder, cruder. When she passed the church, the women would pull their children closer, their face masks of pious disdain. Work, which had been scarce, now vanished entirely. She was untouchable, a pariah in a community that had already cast her out once. Her world had shrunk to the 4 crumbling walls of her cabin and the bright, innocent face of her 10-year-old brother, Danny. He was a small, wiry boy with a shock of sandy hair and their mother's gentle eyes. He saw none of the town's malice. To him, Eliza was simply his sister, the center of his universe, the one who made sure there was always a bit of stew in the pot and a mended patch on his trousers. He spent his days exploring the arid landscape just beyond their doorstep, blissfully unaware of the price she paid for that small pot of stew. Keeping that innocence intact was Eliza's singular purpose, and it was becoming a near impossible task. Their supply of flour and beans was dwindling again. The last of her mother's silver buttons had been traded for a slab of bacon a week ago. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford, but desperation was a currency the town refused to accept from her. One sweltering afternoon, with their pantry nearly bare, Eliza took the last of her mending work, a pile of rough shirts, for a rancher who lived miles out of town and cared little for gossip, and headed toward the general store. She hoped to trade the finished work directly with Mr. Silas for credit. It was a humiliating prospect, but Danny had been coughing, and she needed to buy him a bottle of the whorehound tonic that Silas kept behind the counter. As she stepped onto the main street, a cluster of women stood gossiping near the water trough. At the center was Mrs. Gable, the baker's wife, her arms crossed over her formidable bosom. Her eyes, small and sharp like a hen's, landed on Eliza, and a cruel smile tightened her lips. "Speak of the devil, Mrs." Gable announced, her voice carrying easily in the still air. The other women turned, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Eliza's instinct was to turn and flee, but the image of Danny's pale face hardened her resolve. She clutched her basket of mending tighter and kept walking, her gaze fixed on the door of the general store. "In a hurry, Miss Carter, Mrs." Gable called out, stepping directly into Eliza's path. "Off to another secret meeting, are we? Perhaps you're hoping for another storm to blow in some good fortune." The other women tittered. Heat flooded Eliza's cheeks, a burning shame that was hotter than the midday sun. "Excuse me, Mrs. Gable. I have business to attend to." "Business?" The baker's wife let out a derisive laugh. "We all know what kind of business you're in. Tell me, is Mr. Maddox as generous a man as they say? I'm sure my husband would love to know the secret to getting credit from him." The insult was a physical blow. Eliza flinched, her knuckles white on the handle of her basket. "You have no right to speak to me that way." "I have every right." "Mrs." Gable snapped, her face contorting with a righteous anger. "This is a decent, God-fearing town. We won't have our streets soiled by the likes of you, flaunting your sin for all to see. You're a disgrace, just like your father before you." The mention of her father was a fresh wound. Tears pricked at the back of Eliza's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give them the satisfaction. She tried to step around the woman, but a Mrs. Hemlock, blocked her way. "She's trying to run, Mrs." Hemlock sneered. "Probably got stolen goods in that basket." "Let me see it, Mrs." Gable demanded, reaching for the basket. "No," Eliza cried, pulling back. The shirts inside were her only hope of getting Danny his medicine. The struggle was brief and ugly. "Mrs." Gable wrenched the basket from her grasp. It tumbled to the ground, spilling the neatly folded shirts into the thick, grimy dust of the street, a collective gasp, part feigned shock and part cruel satisfaction, went through the small crowd that had gathered. The shirts, her hours of careful stitching, lay ruined in the dirt. Her last chance was gone. Something inside Eliza broke. The fight went out of her. replaced by a hollow, crushing despair. She stared at the soiled laundry, the symbol of her utter failure, and could not move. "There, Mrs.," Gable said, dusting her hands as if she had just completed a civic duty. "That's where trash belongs, in the gutter." The women began to disperse, their duty done, their venom spent. They left Eliza standing alone in the street, the target of a dozen pointing fingers and scornful looks. She felt stripped bare, her shame a physical weight pressing her down into the dust with her ruined work. And then, through the haze of her misery, she heard the soft jingle of spurs. A shadow fell over her. Cole Maddox had reined in his magnificent black stallion not 10 feet away. He must have seen the whole thing. The humiliation was so complete, so absolute, that Eliza wished the earth would crack open and swallow her. He swung down from the saddle, his movements fluid and economical. The crowd of onlookers, who had been enjoying Eliza's degradation, now shifted uncomfortably. Cole's presence changed the very air, charging it with an unspoken authority. He didn't look at the retreating women. He didn't look at the gawking townsfolk. His gaze was fixed on Eliza and on the pathetic pile of shirts in the dust at her feet. His face was a thundercloud, his jaw set in a hard, angry line. Without a word, he walked past her, stooped, and began to pick up the shirts. He shook the worst of the dust from each one with a sharp snap of his wrists before folding it with a surprising neatness and placing it back in the basket. The silence in the street was absolute. No one dared to move. No one dared to breathe. The sight of the wealthiest man in the territory, the formidable Cole Maddox, kneeling in the dirt to gather a ruined woman's laundry, was a thing beyond their comprehension. He placed the last shirt in the basket and rose to his full height. Turning to face her, he held the basket out to her. His eyes were dark and intense, and she saw a maelstrom of emotions swirling in their depths: anger, frustration, and something else, something that looked almost like pain. "They're not ruined," he said, his voice a low rumble. "A good wash will set them right." She took the basket, her hand trembling so badly she could barely hold it. "Thank you," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. His intervention had saved her, but it had also branded her. In front of the entire town, he had claimed a connection to her, defended her. She was no longer just Eliza Carter, the outcast. She was now Cole Maddox's charity case, his pet project, his something. The weight of the unspoken obligation was suffocating. She hated it. She hated her own weakness, hated that she had needed his help, and hated the dizzying, terrifying warmth that bloomed in her chest at his gruff kindness. She wanted to throw the basket at him, to scream that she didn't need his pity, but she also wanted to lean into the solid strength of him and weep. Why, she managed to ask, her voice barely audible. "Why do you keep—" He seemed to understand the unfinished question. He glanced around at the watching faces, his expression one of pure contempt. "Because no one else in this damn town has the decency to—" he said, his voice low and meant only for her. He turned, swung himself back into the saddle, and without another look, urged his horse into a canter, leaving Dusty Creek and its petty cruelties behind in a cloud of dust. The walk home was a blur of conflicting emotions. Eliza felt a burning shame, but it was now mingled with a spark of bewildered gratitude. He hadn't just helped her. He had defended her honor in the most public way possible. But in doing so, he had tied her to him with invisible threads of debt and speculation. He was a complication she couldn't afford, a beacon of hope that would surely lead to more pain. She had to get away, from him, from this town, from the ghost of her father. Later that evening, as she sat watching Danny sleep, a knock came at the door. Her heart leapt into her throat. No one ever came to her door. With trembling hands, she opened it a crack. Cole Maddox stood on her doorstep. In the soft twilight, he seemed even larger, more out of place against the backdrop of her tiny, impoverished home. He held his hat in his hands, a gesture of respect that seemed utterly alien to the man she thought he was. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice quiet. "May I have a word?" Stunned into silence, she simply stepped back, allowing him to enter. He had to duck his head to clear the low doorway. His presence filled the small room, making it feel even more cramped and shabby. His gaze took in everything in a single, sweeping glance: the patched quilt on Danny's cot, the bare shelves, the single sputtering candle. She saw a muscle twitch in his jaw, but his expression remained unreadable. "I came to apologize," he said, and the words were so unexpected she thought she had misheard. "Apologize for what?" "For what happened in town. For my part in it. The gossip. It started because of me. I should have been more careful." She shook her head. "It's not your fault. They would have found another reason." An uncomfortable silence fell between them. "I saw your brother," he said, his voice softer as he glanced toward the sleeping boy. "He looks frail." "He has a cough," she admitted, the shame returning. "I was trying to get him tonic." Cole's eyes met hers, and the intensity in them made her want to look away. "This is no life for you, or for him," he said. It wasn't an accusation, but a statement of fact. "You can't stay here." "I have nowhere else to go," she whispered, the truth of it a bitter pill. "Yes, you do," he said. He took a breath, as if steeling himself. "I need someone to manage the books at the ranch, the accounts, the payroll for the hands, ordering supplies. It's a mess my last foreman left me. The job comes with lodging a small cottage near the main house. It's clean and sturdy. There would be food from the ranch kitchen, and a fair wage." Eliza stared at him, speechless. Her mind raced, searching for the trick, the hidden cost. Men like him didn't offer salvation to women like her without expecting something in return. "Why?" she asked again, her voice stronger this time. "Why me? You could hire anyone." "Maybe," he conceded. "But I saw you in Silas's store. You checked his figures twice before you paid. You have a sharp mind, and I know you're a hard worker. Mostly," he added, his gaze unwavering. "I believe in giving people a chance, not kicking them when they're down." He paused, and his next words were heavy with meaning. "And out at my ranch, what the gossips in this town think, it doesn't matter a damn." It was a lifeline. It was a cage. It was a way out and a path deeper into a world she didn't understand, with a man who confused and frightened and intrigued her more than anyone she had ever known. To accept was to place herself and her brother entirely at his mercy, to become indebted to him in a way that scared her to her very soul. But to refuse was to condemn Danny to this life of poverty and sickness, to watch him slowly wither under the shadow of a name he didn't choose. She looked from Cole's hard, waiting face to her brother's peaceful one. The choice was never really a choice at all. "I'll need to give the rancher his mended shirts," she said quietly. A flicker of relief, so quick she almost missed it, crossed Cole's face. "I'll send one of my men to fetch your things in the morning," he said. "Be ready at sunrise." He placed his hat back on his head, gave her a curt nod, and was gone, leaving her alone in the sudden silence of the tiny cabin, the world tilting on its axis, forever changed. Part 3. Light in the Darkness. The Maddox Ranch was not a place. It was a kingdom. It spread out under the vast, open sky, a sprawling tapestry of golden plains, rugged hills, and distant, blue-hazed mesas. It was a world away from the suffocating confines of Dusty Creek. Here, the air tasted of clean earth and wild sage, and the silence was a living thing, broken only by the lowing of cattle, the nicker of horses, and the ceaseless whisper of the wind through the tall grass. It was a place of immense power and untamed beauty, and it was all a reflection of the man who ruled it. The cottage Cole provided for them was nestled in a grove of cottonwood trees, a stone's throw from the main ranch house, but offering a sense of privacy Eliza hadn't known she craved. It was small and simple, but it was clean. The floors were solid, and the windows looked out onto the rolling hills instead of a dusty street filled with hateful eyes. For the first time in years, Eliza felt she could breathe. Danny was transformed. The boy who had been pale and listless in town was now a whirlwind of energy. The endless expanse of the ranch was his personal paradise. His cough vanished in the dry, clean air, and his cheeks gained a healthy, sun-kissed color. He saw Cole Maddox as a giant from a storybook, a king in his castle, and he followed him with a wide-eyed adoration that was both endearing and, to Eliza, slightly terrifying. Eliza, meanwhile, threw herself into her work with a fierce, quiet determination. The ranch office was a small, masculine room in the main house, smelling of leather, tobacco, and old paper. The ledgers were indeed a mess, a chaotic scrawl of numbers and half-forgotten debts. But for Eliza, bringing order to that chaos was a balm to her soul. It was tangible, measurable work. Here, her worth was not judged by her father's name, but by the clean, sharp lines of her columns and the accuracy of her sums. In those first few weeks, her interactions with Cole were brief and professional. He would come into the office at dusk, smelling of dust and sweat, his face etched with the day's labor. He would stand over her shoulder, his presence filling the small space, and review her work. He spoke little, but his grunts of approval were worth more to her than 1,000 pretty words. She was not his charity case. She was his bookkeeper. She was earning her keep, and the knowledge was a shield for her fragile pride. But as the days bled into weeks, she began to see beyond the formidable ranch owner. She saw the man. She saw it in the way he treated his men with a demanding fairness that earned him unwavering loyalty. She overheard him telling the cook to send a hearty stew over to the cabin of an old ranch hand named Silas, who had been put out to pasture with a broken leg but was still kept on full pay. When a young green cowhand made a costly mistake that resulted in a dozen head of cattle scattering, Cole didn't fire him. Instead, he spent the next 2 days riding alongside the boy, patiently teaching him how to read the land and the herd. Eliza discovered more of his secrets in the pages of her ledgers. There were regular payments made to a widow in a town 50 miles south, listed under the cryptic heading of supplies. There was a recurring fund set aside for the Apache family that lived on the far edge of his property. The note beside it simply reading, "For seed and blankets." This was the real Cole Maddox, a man who used his power not to dominate, but to quietly shield those the world had left behind. He was a fortress, not just of land and cattle, but of compassion. And this secret knowledge, this glimpse into his closely guarded heart, began to irrevocably soften her own. The true turning point, however, came with Danny. Cole, who was so often stern and unsmiling with his men, seemed to melt in the presence of the boy. He never spoke down to him, but treated his questions about horses and cattle with a solemn gravity that made Danny puff out his chest with importance. One sun-drenched afternoon, Eliza looked out the office window to see Cole leading a gentle, doe-eyed mare into the corral. Danny was trailing him, chattering away excitedly. Cole lifted the boy and settled him onto the horse's bare back. Eliza's heart leaped into her throat, a knot of fear and something else she couldn't name. She abandoned her ledgers and hurried outside, her heart pounding. She found them in the center of the corral, Cole leading the horse in a slow, careful circle, one hand resting protectively on Danny's leg. Danny wasn't holding on in fear. He was sitting tall, his small face alight with a look of pure, unadulterated joy. He was laughing, a bright, clear sound that echoed across the ranch yard. "Hold on now, little bit," Cole was saying. His deep voice softened with an unfamiliar gentleness. "Feel the rhythm of her walk. She's a part of you, and you're a part of her." Eliza stopped at the fence, her protest dying on her lips. She watched them, a silent observer to this moment of profound, simple kindness. Cole was giving her brother more than a riding lesson. He was giving him a piece of his childhood back, a memory of strength and happiness that had nothing to do with shame or poverty. Cole glanced up and saw her. A faint smile touched his lips, a rare and startlingly handsome sight. It wasn't the mocking smirk from the night of the confession. It was genuine, in that shared look, across the dusty space of the corral. An unspoken understanding passed between them. He wasn't just her employer. He was becoming something more. From that day on, a subtle shift occurred. They were no longer just a rancher and his bookkeeper. He began to teach her, too. He'd take her out from behind her desk and show her the vast workings of his empire. He taught her how to judge the health of a calf, how to read a brand, how to tell by the color of the grass if the land needed rest. She discovered a surprising aptitude for it, a connection to the rhythms of the land she never knew she possessed. They would ride for hours, their conversations moving easily from the price of beef in Chicago to the stories behind the scars on the land, and occasionally, the faintest hints of the scars they both carried within. In these moments, she saw the weight he carried. He spoke of the ranch as a legacy, a responsibility, but sometimes, when he looked out at the horizon, a profound loneliness would settle in his eyes, a shadow that all his land and wealth could not fill. They were becoming a strange, unofficial family. Evenings were often spent on the porch of the main house, with Danny asleep in a chair, while Eliza and Cole spoke in low tones, the stars blazing in the ink-black sky above them. The rigid lines of employer and employee had blurred into a comfortable, if unspoken, friendship. One Sunday, after a particularly grueling week of branding, Cole declared a day of rest. "There's a place I want to show you," he said, his invitation including them both. He led them on horseback, not towards the open plains, but up into the rolling hills that bordered the northern edge of his property. After an hour's ride through dry, rocky terrain, he guided them down into a small, hidden canyon. The temperature dropped, and the air grew cool and moist. And then, Eliza saw it. It was an oasis, a miracle in the middle of the arid west. A clear, spring-fed creek chuckled over smooth stones, its banks lined with a carpet of lush, impossibly green grass. Wildflowers of vibrant blue and yellow dotted the landscape, and the shade of ancient, gnarled oak trees offered a cool respite from the sun. It was a secret, sacred place. "My father found this place," Cole said, his voice quiet, almost reverent. "He said it was proof that there's a soft spot in the heart of even the harshest country." Danny whooped with joy and immediately scrambled off his pony to chase a butterfly, his laughter echoing softly in the canyon. For a while, Eliza and Cole just sat on their horses, watching him. A sense of peace settled over Eliza, so deep and complete it felt like a dream. Here, there was no dusty creek, no judgmental eyes, no ghost of a hanged father. There was only the gentle murmur of the water, the warmth of the sun, and the quiet, solid presence of the man beside her. They dismounted and sat in the cool grass, leaning against the trunk of an old oak. They shared the simple lunch the cook had packed: bread, cheese, and apples, while Danny explored the creek's edge. "He's happy here," Cole observed, his gaze on the boy. "I've never seen him so happy," Eliza admitted, her voice thick with emotion. I can never thank you enough for that." Cole. It was the first time she had used his given name, and it felt both strange and perfectly natural on her tongue. He turned to look at her, his whiskey-colored eyes searching her face. "There's no need for thanks. Eliza, seeing him like that, it's payment enough." The world seemed to shrink to the small space between them. She was acutely aware of his nearness, the strength in the line of his shoulder, the way the sun caught the silver strands at his temples. She saw the rancher, the protector, the quiet benefactor. But now, for the first time, she allowed herself to see the man, a man who carried his own burdens, a man who possessed a deep well of kindness he tried so hard to hide. A longing, sharp and sweet, pierced through the careful walls she had built around her heart. It was a dangerous feeling, a terrifying hope that whispered of a future she had never dared to imagine. Here, in this hidden paradise, shielded from the cruelty of the world, it was easy to believe that they were just a man and a woman, and a boy who loved them both. It was easy to believe they could become a family, but she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the harsh world was still out there, just beyond the canyon walls, waiting. Part 4. The Storm of Prejudice. The peace they had found in the heart of the Maddox Ranch was as fragile and beautiful as a wildflower in the desert. For a few short months, it had been allowed to bloom, shielded from the harsh world by the sheer scale of Cole's land and the force of his will. Eliza had begun to feel safe, to believe that the ghosts of Dusty Creek could not reach her here. But prejudice has long arms, and its whispers can be carried on the wind, traveling for miles to poison any paradise. The first sign of the encroaching storm came during a necessary trip to town for supplies that couldn't be sourced from the ranch. Cole had insisted Eliza and Danny accompany him. A simple, public statement that they were under his protection. The journey, which should have felt like a family outing, was tense. As their wagon rolled down the main street, a silence fell, thicker and more hostile than ever before. The glares that followed them were no longer just contemptuous. They were venomous. While Cole was negotiating with the freight agent, Eliza took Danny to the general store. The moment she stepped inside, the atmosphere curdled. A woman she recognized from the church pulled her child away from the candy jar as if Eliza were a disease. Mr. Silas served her, but he slammed the goods on the counter and counted her money with an expression of profound disgust. It was then that she heard it, a stage whisper from two women near the bolt of calico, loud enough for the entire store to hear. "There she is, Maddox's paid companion," one of them said, "lives in his pocket, warms his bed. Some women have no shame." The word struck Eliza with the force of a physical blow. Paid companion. The lie was so ugly, so cruel in its deliberate misreading of her situation. She was his bookkeeper. She worked tirelessly for her wage, for the roof over her and Danny's head. But they had twisted her honest labor into something sordid. She grabbed Danny's hand, her face burning with a shame she didn't deserve, and fled the store, leaving her remaining supplies on the counter. She saw then that the fortress Cole had built around them was not impenetrable. It had walls, but the town's poison could still seep through the cracks. The incident was only the beginning. The whispers grew into a low, steady rumble of disapproval that eventually reached the ears of the town's self-appointed moral guardians. One afternoon, a buggy far too formal for the rugged ranch road made its way towards the main house. In it sat Mayor Thompson, a man whose spine was as flexible as his political promises, and beside him, the grim and imposing figure of Reverend Michaels. Cole met them on the porch, his stance rigid, his face like carved stone. He offered no welcome, just a cold, "What do you want?" Eliza watched from the office window, her stomach twisting into a cold knot. "Cole," the mayor began, wringing his hat in his hands, "we come as friends, as pillars of the community. There is talk." "There's always talk in Dusty Creek," Cole said, his voice flat. "It's the town's primary business." Reverend Michaels stepped forward, his Bible clutched in one hand like a weapon. "This is more than idle talk. Son, this is a matter of moral contagion. You have taken in a woman of ill repute, the daughter of a criminal. You flaunt her presence here. It sets a dangerous example. It is an affront to God and to the decent families of our town." "The only thing indecent I see," Cole countered, his voice dropping to a dangerous low, "is a town that would stone a woman for the crime of being poor and alone. Eliza Carter is my bookkeeper. She is a respectable woman who works for an honest wage, a wage that allows her to live under your protection. On your land," the Reverend sneered. "The arrangement is an impropriety that threatens your own good name. Cole, the name of your father, the other ranchers, the investors back east. They value reputation. A man's word is his bond, but his reputation is his capital. You are endangering everything you've built for. For what? A piece of damaged goods. The insult hung in the air, ugly and vile. Eliza saw Cole's hands clench into fists at his sides. For a terrifying moment, she thought he would throw the preacher off his porch, but he held himself in check, his control absolute. My reputation and my ranch are my business, Cole said, his voice leaving no room for argument. This conversation is over. Get off my land. The men left, their faces stiff with indignation, but they had planted their seed of doubt. They had reminded Cole of the stakes, that his world was bigger than the boundaries of his ranch, that he was connected to a web of commerce and society that depended on appearances. The true threat, however, did not come dressed in a mayor's suit or a preacher's collar. It came on horseback, wearing a confident smile that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. His name was Wade Harper. Harper owned the ranch to the south of Cole's, a sizable spread he'd acquired through ruthless ambition and a string of questionable dealings. He and Cole had been rivals for years, their enmity simmering over disputes about water rights and grazing lands. Harper was everything Cole was not, charming where Cole was reserved, ostentatious where Cole was practical, and openly cruel where Cole was secretly compassionate. He saw Cole's success not as something to be respected, but as an affront to his own ego. He found Cole at the saloon in Dusty Creek a few days later. Cole was there to finalize the cattle drive contract, a deal that was crucial for the ranch's yearly profits. Harper sauntered over to his table, a glass of whiskey in his hand, exuding an air of false camaraderie. Maddox, Harper began, his smile wide and predatory. I hear you've run into a spot of trouble with the town elders. Cole didn't look up from his papers. I don't have trouble. Harper, I have trespassers. Harper laughed. That's a good one. But this isn't about them, is it? It's about you, a man in your position. You look weak, taking in strays, defending the town whore. The other ranchers are talking. They're saying Maddox has gone soft. What other ranchers want is of no concern to me, Cole said, his voice level. But it should be. Harper leaned in, his voice dropping. Because I'm one of them, and I'm starting to think that shared grazing agreement we have up on the North Range is a little too generous. And that spring that feeds both our herds, well, water has a way of getting diverted. Doesn't it, especially when a man's neighbors lose their respect for him? Here it was, the ultimatum, wrapped in a silken threat. This wasn't about morality. It was about power. Wade was using Eliza as a lever, a crowbar, to pry apart the foundations of Cole's empire. She's just a girl. Cole, Harper continued, straightening up, a nobody from the gutter. Is she really worth it? Is she worth your father's legacy? Think about it. All you have to do is send her packing. The talk dies down, and business continues as usual. But if she stays, well, a ranch can't survive without water and grass. And it certainly can't survive without allies. Wade clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture of mock friendship. Just some friendly advice. You know where to find me when you come to your senses. He strode out of the saloon, leaving Cole sitting in a pool of silence, the weight of the threat settling over him like a shroud. The change in Cole was immediate and devastating. The easy warmth that had grown between him and Eliza vanished, replaced by a brooding, impenetrable distance. The shared smiles, the long talks on the porch, the comfortable silences, they were all gone. He became a ghost in his own home, spending his days riding the farthest fences of his property and his nights locked in his office, staring at maps of his land as if they were battle plans. Eliza felt the chill of his withdrawal in her very bones. He still spoke to her, but his words were clipped and formal, strictly about the ledgers and ranch business. He avoided her eyes. He no longer sought her out. And worst of all, he started making excuses to avoid Danny. The boy's heartbroken confusion was another dagger in Eliza's heart. She knew, with a sickening certainty, that she was the cause. She didn't know the specifics of Wade Harper's threats, but she had seen the mayor and the preacher. She understood the choice they were forcing upon him. It was her, or his life's work. Her, or his father's legacy. Her, the gambler's daughter, the town disgrace, or this magnificent kingdom he had built. How could he possibly choose her? The question was absurd. Her old insecurities came rushing back, a suffocating tide of worthlessness. She was a curse. She brought ruin to everything she touched. Her father had been destroyed by his own choices, and now she was about to destroy the one man who had saved her from that same fate. The safety of the ranch now felt like a prison, her position a ticking clock counting down to her inevitable expulsion. One evening, unable to bear the tense silence of her cottage, she walked toward the main house. Through the office window, she saw him. He was standing before the massive stone fireplace, not looking at the flames, but staring up at the portrait of his father that hung above the mantel. It was the portrait of a hard, proud man, the patriarch who had carved this empire from nothing. Cole stood there, utterly still, his shoulders slumped with a weariness she had never seen in him before. He was trapped between the ghost of his father and the ghost she represented. He was a man caught between his honor and his heart, and she could see the terrible, agonizing weight of his hesitation. He was choosing, and in her heart, she was certain she had already lost. Part V, the confession and the breaking point. The days that followed were a quiet, refined form of torture. The vast, open spaces of the ranch, which had once felt like freedom, now seemed like the walls of a beautifully appointed cage. A heavy, waiting silence hung between Eliza and Cole, thick and suffocating as the summer heat. He was a storm cloud on the horizon of her life, a man wrestling with demons she could see but not name, and she was the helpless homesteader in the storm's path. Every polite, distant word he spoke to her, every averted gaze, was a small death to the fragile hope that had taken root in her heart. She knew she was the cause of his turmoil. She was the poison in his well, the sickness in his herd. The weight of it became unbearable, a physical ache that settled deep in her chest. She couldn't eat. She couldn't sleep. She would lie awake in her cottage, listening to the lonely cry of a coyote, and feel a kinship with the creature's desolation. She could not stand by and watch the world of this good, decent man crumble to dust because of her. One night, when the air was so still and hot, it felt like the world was holding its breath. She made a decision. It was a choice born of a love so profound it demanded sacrifice. She would release him from his obligation. She would disappear. After Danny had fallen into the deep, untroubled sleep of childhood, she walked the short distance to the main house. A single lamp burned in the office window, casting a solitary golden rectangle onto the dark yard. She found him there, standing not at his desk, but by the open window, staring out into the starless, oppressive night. A half-empty bottle of whiskey stood on the desk beside a stack of untouched paperwork. He didn't turn as she entered, but she saw his shoulders tense. "You should be asleep," he said, his voice rough. "I couldn't," she answered, her own voice a thin, reedy thing. She stopped in the middle of the room, twisting her hands in the fabric of her simple dress. "Cole, I've come to tell you that I'm leaving." That made him turn. His face was stark in the lamplight, all harsh angles and shadows. The weary lines around his eyes seemed deeper than she'd ever seen them. "Leaving, where would you go?" "It doesn't matter. West, maybe. California. I'll find work. We'll be fine. Danny and I..." The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. "I'm grateful for everything you've done. More than I can ever say. But I cannot stay here. I won't be the reason Wade Harper and this town tear you down." A bitter, humorless smile touched his lips. "So you heard the gossip all the way out here?" "I don't need to hear it," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "I can see it in your face. I can feel it. They've given you a choice. Your ranch, your father's legacy. Or me? And that is not a choice at all. It's a foregone conclusion. I am releasing you." He moved then, stalking from the window to the desk, his energy that of a caged wolf. He poured another measure of whiskey into his glass and tossed it back in one swallow. He slammed the glass down on the wood. "This is not your decision to make." "Isn't it?" she cried, the carefully constructed dam of her control beginning to crack. "It's my name they're dragging through the mud. It's my father's sins they're laying at your door. I will not be your burden. Cole, I will not be the millstone that sinks you." "You think that's what you are to me," he growled, turning on her, his eyes blazing with a potent mix of fury and something else, something that looked terrifyingly like anguish. "A millstone. After all this? What else could I be?" she shot back, tears finally gathering, hot and sharp, in her eyes. "Listen to them. They call me your paid woman, a harlot you keep for your own amusement. They think you took me in for sordid reasons. They believe I sold myself to you for a roof and a meal. Don't you see, your defending me only makes it look truer in their eyes. You're fighting to protect the honor of a woman they believe has none left. The injustice of it all, the town's vile assumptions, her own hopeless situation, it all came pouring out of her in a torrent of despair. She was trying to save him, trying to make him see the futility of his struggle. She had to make him understand the worthlessness of the object he was defending. "They don't know anything about you," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble as he took a step toward her. "They know enough," she sobbed, taking a step back. "They know I am Abraham Carter's daughter, and that is all that matters. You are sacrificing everything for a phantom, for a woman who doesn't exist in their minds. They see me as ruined, and in this world, that is the same as being ruined." Her desperation reached its peak. She had one last truth, one final, pathetic piece of herself to lay bare, to prove to him how wrong he was, how misguided his loyalty. The words were ripped from the deepest, most secret part of her soul, a place of shame and girlhood innocence she thought had been buried long ago. She looked him straight in the eye, the tears streaming down her face, her body trembling with the force of her confession. "I'm still a virgin," she cried, the words a raw, broken whisper in the tense silence of the room. The confession hung in the air between them, stark and shocking. It was the ultimate testament to her isolation, the proof of how truly untouched she was by the world that so eagerly condemned her. Cole stopped dead. The fury in his eyes dissolved, replaced by a wave of stunned comprehension. He stared at her, at the tears tracking paths through the dust on her cheeks, at the utter, devastating vulnerability in her expression. The silence stretched, filled only by her ragged breathing. And then, a slow, profound change came over his face. The hard lines of his jaw softened. A wry, infinitely tender smile touched the corners of his mouth, a smile that was part gentle amusement, part fierce devotion. He closed the remaining distance between them, his movements no longer angry, but deliberate and sure. He reached out, his calloused hands coming up to cup her face, his thumbs gently brushing away her tears. His voice, when he spoke, was a low, intimate murmur, a promise that cut through all the noise of the outside world, through all her fear and all her pain. "Not after tonight, sweetheart." The words were not a threat, nor a crude proposition. They were a declaration of choice, a vow. It was his answer to Wade Harper, to the Reverend, to the whole damn town. It was him, shattering the very foundation of her argument, telling her without question that their labels, their judgments, their entire twisted view of the world meant absolutely nothing. He was choosing her, not the idea of her, not her reputation, but her in that moment. He was choosing her over everything else. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a kiss of simple passion, but of profound, soul-deep relief. It was the end of a long and lonely battle for both of them. It tasted of whiskey and sorrow and a desperate, burgeoning hope. All the tension, all the fear and doubt and hesitation that had plagued him for weeks melted away in that single, decisive act. He broke the kiss and rested his forehead against hers, his breathing as unsteady as her own. "I'm not letting you go. Eliza," he whispered against her lips. "Not now, not ever. Let them talk. Let them try to ruin me. This ranch is just dirt and lumber without you." He swept her up into his arms, and she didn't protest. The fight had gone out of her, replaced by a terrifying, exhilarating surrender. He carried her from the office, through the dark, silent house, and up the stairs to his bedroom, a room she had never seen, a place that was the heart of his solitary life. He laid her gently on the large bed, the moonlight from the window tracing a silver path across the quilt. There were no more words. There was no need for them. Everything that needed to be said had been settled with his kiss, with his choice. His movements were unhurried, infinitely tender. As he undressed her, he treated her body not as a conquest, but as a sacred text he was finally being allowed to read. He memorized the line of her collarbone, the curve of her waist, the frightened, trusting look in her eyes. For Eliza, the world fell away. There was only the solid, reassuring weight of him, the gentle rasp of his hands on her skin, the fierce devotion in his eyes. He was erasing the town's lies, replacing their brand of shame with his own mark of adoration. He was showing her, with every touch, every kiss, every whispered word of praise, that she was not a burden, but a treasure. He made her feel beautiful, wanted, and, for the first time in her life, utterly and completely cherished. It was a joining not just of bodies, but of two lonely, wounded souls who had finally found their harbor in each other. Later, wrapped in his arms in the quiet darkness, with his steady heartbeat a drum against her ear, the terror began to seep back in. The warmth of his body, the possessive strength of his embrace, was no longer just a comfort. It was the proof of his decision. He had crossed the line. He had chosen her irrevocably, and the consequences of that choice would now come for him. The love that swelled in her heart was so powerful, it was painful. It was a fierce, protective love that could not bear to see him harmed. He had given her a night of impossible beauty, a glimpse of a life she never dreamed she could have, and because she loved him, she knew she could not let him pay the price for it. As dawn began to paint the eastern sky in pale shades of rose and gray, she slipped from his bed. He was sleeping deeply, the exhausted sleep of a man whose war was finally over. The harsh lines on his face were gone, and in their place was a look of profound peace. Her heart broke looking at him. Quiet as a ghost, she dressed in the pale light. She took one last look at his sleeping face, memorizing the shape of it, the strength and the kindness she had found there. A single tear traced a path down her cheek as she leaned down and pressed the softest, most fleeting of kisses to his brow. "I love you," she whispered into the silence. And then, before her courage could fail her, she turned and fled. She ran from the man she loved, from the only true home she had ever known, back out into the harsh, unforgiving world, to save him from himself. Wade Harper vadong bondo trai chan nuai, get giasuk nam buak kol supdo. Kol bithuang trong kwak dausung, Elizabeth chap ngui hiem kwe lai kuan. Shung dot noi tai kolin an raan the mat hetat kakon hon mat Eliza. Eliza lan dao dung kam doi dien di tran, to Cowboy truok dan lang. Hien tien trin tu dui, part 6, Blood and Gunsmoke. Flight was a desperate, silent scream. Eliza moved through the pre-dawn chill like a wraith, her only luggage the sleeping, dead weight of her brother in her arms and a small bundle of bread and dried meat snatched from the cottage kitchen. Every creak of a floorboard, every rustle of a leaf in the cottonwoods, was a gunshot in the silence, threatening to wake the man she was leaving behind. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, a rhythm of love and terror. "I'm doing this for you," she chanted in her mind, a mantra against the overwhelming urge to turn back. "I'm saving you." She carried Danny until her arms burned and her lungs were raw. Then she set him on his feet, his sleepy confusion a fresh twist of the knife in her gut. "We're going on an adventure, sweet boy," she whispered, her voice a rough imitation of cheerfulness. "A long walk to see the sunrise from the hills." He was too young to understand the lie, but he was old enough to feel the fear radiating from her like heat. He took her hand without complaint, his small fingers a fragile anchor in her swirling chaos. They walked west, away from the ranch, away from Cole, away from the only home they had ever known. They were two tiny figures against a vast, indifferent landscape, swallowed by the immense loneliness of the prairie. By mid-morning, the sun was a merciless hammer. They had no water, and the bread was dry in her throat. Danny's steps began to drag. Looking back, she saw nothing but the endless stretch of land. Looking forward, she saw the same. Her brave sacrifice was beginning to feel like a fool's errand, a slow suicide. She had run from the fire only to find herself dying of thirst in the desert. It was a faint, dark smudge against the clear blue sky that first caught her eye. It was to the north, in the direction of the Maddox Ranch's high summer pastures. At first, she thought it was a strangely shaped cloud, but it did not move. It did not dissipate. It thickened, roiling upwards, a dirty column of black and gray. Smoke, a great deal of smoke. An animal instinct, cold and sharp, seized her. That was ranch property. A wildfire, unlikely. There had been no lightning. Her mind leaped to the threats, to the smug, cruel face of Wade Harper. A ranch can't survive without water and grass. Panic, sharper and more immediate than her fear for herself, clawed at her throat. She looked down at Danny, whose face was pale with exhaustion. She couldn't take him with her. She couldn't leave him. She was paralyzed, torn between the two people she loved most in the world. As if in answer to a prayer she hadn't dared to utter, she saw a thin trickle of smoke rising from a draw a half-mile ahead. A homesteader's cabin, hope, fierce and desperate, surged through her. She half-dragged, half-carried Danny toward it, rehearsing a frantic plea in her mind. The woman who answered the door was named Martha, her face a roadmap of prairie hardship, but her eyes were kind. Eliza spilled out a frantic, edited version of her story. Her brother was ill. She was a bookkeeper from the Maddox Ranch. There was a fire. She needed to go for help. Could she please leave the boy here for just a few hours? She pressed the last of her coins, the ones she had been saving for their escape, into the woman's hand. Martha, seeing the raw terror in Eliza's eyes, simply nodded, pulling a sleepy Danny into the cool darkness of the cabin. "Go on, girl," she said. "Godspeed." Freed of her precious burden, Eliza ran. She ran with a strength she didn't know she possessed, fueled by adrenaline and a terrifying love. She ran back towards the life she had just fled, back towards the man she had tried to save by leaving. Cole had woken to an empty bed, the scent of her still on the pillow a ghostly mockery. The cold dread that hit him was a physical blow, worse than any bullet. He found her note on the office desk, a few simple, heartbreaking lines. "Forgive me. I could not let you lose everything for me. Be happy." Fury warred with a grief so profound it threatened to bring him to his knees. He was about to rouse his men, to track her to the ends of the earth if he had to, when the rider came. He was a young hand named Billy, his face pale with shock, his horse lathered in sweat. "Mr. Maddox, it's the North Camp Harper and a dozen men. They're setting fire to the grass, shooting the herd." The two calamities, Eliza's flight and Harper's attack, slammed together in Cole's mind, and the world came into sharp, terrible focus. This was Harper's answer to his choice. This was the price. The grief in his heart hardened instantly into a cold, killing rage. "Ride out," he roared to his foreman. "Every man with a rifle. We meet them at Cutter's Ridge." The battle, when it came, was a chaotic swirl of gun smoke, dust, and the terrified bellowing of dying cattle. It was not a clean fight. It was a vicious, ugly skirmish, fought among the rocks and sagebrush. Cole's men were outnumbered, caught by surprise, but they were fighting for their home, and they fought with a cold fury that matched their bosses. Cole fought like a man possessed, a man with nothing left to lose. He moved with a deadly grace, his Colt speaking in short, definitive sentences. He saw Wade Harper across the clearing, sitting on his horse like a king surveying his destruction, a triumphant sneer on his face. Cole spurred his horse forward, breaking through the line of skirmishers, his entire being focused on the man who had driven her away. He never made it. A rifle cracked from the rocks to his left. A white-hot lance of pain seared through his shoulder, knocking him from the saddle. He hit the ground hard, the impact stealing his breath. His arm was a useless, burning weight. He tried to push himself up, but the world tilted and swam in a haze of red. Through the ringing in his ears, he could hear Harper's men moving closer, their triumphant shouts echoing in the smoky air. He fumbled for his Colt with his good hand, his movement sluggish, his vision blurring at the edges. So this is it, he thought with a strange, detached clarity. He wins. It was the scream that cut through his haze. A woman's scream, high and furious. Get away from him! Through the smoke, he saw an apparition. It was Eliza. She was running toward him, her hair flying, her face smudged with soot and streaked with tears. In her hands, she held a heavy branch, brandishing it like a club. She looked magnificent. She looked like a Valkyrie come to drag him from the battlefield. Her sudden appearance was so shocking, it momentarily stunned both sides into inaction. Two of Harper's men, who had been closing in on Cole, stopped and stared, their mouths agape. "What in the hell?" one of them muttered. Eliza didn't hesitate. She ran straight at them, screaming with a rage that was primal and terrifying, swinging the heavy branch with all her might. The sheer, unexpected ferocity of her attack made them stumble backward. Her arrival was the distraction Cole's men needed. They laid down a volley of covering fire, forcing Harper's men back behind the rocks. Eliza fell to her knees beside Cole, her hands fluttering over his wound. "Cole! Oh, God! Cole! You're bleeding!" "Eliza!" he breathed, his voice a hoarse whisper. The pain was immense, but it was nothing compared to the overwhelming, soul-shattering relief of seeing her face. "You came back." "Of course I came back." "You fool!" she sobbed, tearing a strip from her petticoat to press against the wound. "Did you think I would let them do this to you?" Lying there in the dirt, bleeding, with his ranch burning around him and the woman he loved risking her life for him, everything became clear. The internal battle he had waged for weeks was over. The legacy, the land, his father's portrait, the town's respect, it was all just dust. Meaningless. He had been so afraid of losing his kingdom, he hadn't realized his kingdom was worthless without its queen. He would let Harper burn it all to the ground, let it all turn to ash. If it meant he could keep her, the only thing of value in his entire world was the fierce, courageous woman kneeling beside him, her hands stained with his blood. "I was wrong," he whispered, his good hand coming up to touch her cheek. "I was a damned fool. I'm not losing you, Eliza. I'd rather lose it all." Her name on his lips, the look in his eyes, gave her a strength she never knew she had. The gunfight raged around them, but in their small circle of dust and pain, they were the only two people in the world. The tide of the battle turned. Cole's foreman, a grizzled old hand named Hank, managed to flank Harper's men, and the element of surprise was lost, seeing that his quick, brutal victory had devolved into a protracted fight he might not win. Wade Harper gave the signal to retreat, leaving behind a field of dead cattle and smoldering grass. Cole's men carried him back to the ranch. With Eliza refusing to leave his side, they laid him on the long table in the main kitchen, and she became a general in a war against death. She sent a rider for the doctor in the next town, not trusting the drunkard in Dusty Creek. She boiled water, sterilized a knife in the fire, and with a grim determination that stunned the hardened cowboys watching, She dug the bullet from his shoulder herself, her hand surprisingly steady. By the time the doctor arrived hours later, Cole was feverish and weak, but the wound was clean and tightly bandaged. The doctor looked at her work with grudging admiration. "You saved his arm, ma'am, maybe his life." The next day, with his arm in a sling and his face pale but resolute, Cole insisted on being taken into Dusty Creek. He needed the sheriff. He said he needed to file a report, but Eliza knew it was more than that. It was a showdown. They rode in the wagon, Cole propped up on pillows, Eliza sitting beside him, her hand resting on his good one. As they entered the town, a crowd gathered. The news had already arrived, twisted and turned by rumor. They saw Cole, wounded. They saw Eliza Carter at his side, no longer a bookkeeper, no longer a charity case, but something else entirely. Her dress was torn and blood-stained. Her face was smudged with soot, but she held her head high, her gaze sweeping over them, defiant and unafraid. Wade Harper was standing on the steps of the saloon, surrounded by his men, a look of smug confidence on his face. He would deny everything. Of course, it would be his word against Cole's, but he hadn't counted on Eliza. Before Cole could even speak to the sheriff, Eliza stood up in the wagon, her voice clear and ringing with a righteous fury, carried across the silent street. "Wade Harper," she called out, and every eye turned to her. "You are a coward and a thief." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Harper's smile faltered. "You came onto the Maddox Ranch like a snake in the grass," she continued, her voice gaining strength, pointing a trembling but resolute finger at him. "You set fire to his land and murdered his cattle because you couldn't beat him as a man. You tried to ruin him because he showed me kindness, because he offered me a home when this town offered me nothing but scorn." She turned her fiery gaze on the townspeople, on the women who had whispered about her, on the men who had judged her. "You all stood by and let it happen. You condemned me for my father's name, and you condemned him for defending me. Well, look at him. This is the price of your prejudice. This is the good man your hatred almost killed." She turned back to Harper, her eyes blazing. "I saw you, Wade. I saw you give the order. I will stand before any judge. I will swear on any Bible, and I will tell the world what you did here today. You will not get away with this." She sat down, her body trembling with the aftermath of her courage. A stunned silence fell over Dusty Creek. They had known Eliza Carter as a quiet, shamed girl who stared at the ground. They did not know this woman, this lioness, who had just publicly accused the second most powerful man in the county. Her words, spoken with such raw, unshakable conviction, had a power that no rumor could match. She had done more than accuse a man. She had held up a mirror to the entire town, and they did not like the reflection they saw. The tide had not yet turned, but for the first time, a stone had been thrown, and the waters of their certainty were beginning to ripple. Part 7, Justice and a Choice. Eliza's voice, ringing with the clarity of a church bell, left a crater of silence in the dusty street. For a long moment, no one moved. The townspeople of Dusty Creek, who had long viewed her as a ghost to be shunned, were now confronted with a woman of flesh and blood and furious, unassailable truth. She had not just spoken, she had detonated a bomb of conscience in their midst. Wade Harper was the first to recover, his politician's instinct for control kicking in. He threw back his head and laughed, a hollow, booming sound that failed to mask the flicker of panic in his eyes. "Well, listen to that," he drawled, gesturing dismissively at the wagon. "The little tramp has found her voice. Sheriff, are you really going to listen to the hysterical ravings of Maddox's new plaything?" Sheriff Brody, a man whose spine was made of dust and indecision, looked from Harper's sneering face to Cole's stony, wounded one. He saw Cole's good hand resting near his Colt, and he saw the dozen Maddox ranch hands who had quietly fanned out around the square, their eyes hard and watchful. Brody's desire for self-preservation finally outweighed his fear of Harper. "Now, Wade," the sheriff began, his voice quavering slightly. "A serious accusation has been made, in public." "It's the word of a known liar against mine," Harper blustered. "It's my word, too." Cole's voice cut through the tension, low and serrated as a blade. He pushed himself to sit up straighter, the effort costing him, but his gaze was unwavering. "He led the attack. I saw him. My men saw him. And Miss Carter saw him. He tried to destroy my ranch and murder my men. Arrest him. Brody. Now." The direct command, backed by the wounded man's undeniable authority, was the final push. The sheriff, swallowing hard, drew his pistol. "Wade Harper, you're under arrest for attempted murder and destruction of property." Harper's bravado shattered, his face purpled with rage. "You'll regret this. Brody, all of you, this town will be nothing when I'm through with it." His men shifted, their hands moving toward their guns, but a low murmur from Cole's foreman, Hank, and the cocking of a dozen rifles froze them in place. They would not fight for a losing cause. Wade Harper was alone. The arrest of its second most powerful citizen did not heal Dusty Creek. In some ways, it only deepened the wound. The prejudice against Eliza didn't vanish. It simply changed its shape. She was no longer just the town sinner. She was now the agent of chaos, the woman who had brought gunsmoke and bloodshed to their streets. The whispers followed her not with simple scorn, but with a new, fearful resentment. "She's a troublemaker, Mrs." Gable was heard to declare at the general store. Things were quiet until she decided to climb her way into a rich man's bed. In an attempt to restore civic harmony, as Mayor Thompson put it, a town council meeting was called. It was to be held in the church, the only building large enough, and it had the solemn, judgmental air of a tribunal. It was not a trial of Wade Harper that would be for the circuit judge, but a trial of Cole and Eliza's right to exist together in a town that refused to understand them. The church was packed. On one side sat Harper's allies and the town's most rigid moralists. On the other, Cole's men filled the pews, a silent, formidable show of loyalty. In the middle sat the rest of the town, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and unease. Cole sat at the front, his arm in a clean white sling. Eliza beside him. She had insisted on coming. She would not hide. She wore a simple gray dress, her hair pulled back neatly. There was no trace of the wild, soot-stained woman who had screamed in the street, only a quiet, unnerving composure. Reverend Michaels opened the proceedings with a prayer for guidance and a thinly veiled sermon on the wages of sin and the dangers of unholy alliances. Then Mayor Thompson, sweating under the pressure, cleared his throat and addressed Cole. "Mr. Maddox," he began, "no one is happy about what transpired. Violence has scarred our community. While Mr. Harper is in custody, many citizens feel that the underlying situation that led to this conflict must be addressed. Your association with Miss Carter has been a source of great division. Several of Harper's ranch hands, their stories well rehearsed, testified that the fight had been a long simmering dispute over grazing rights, and that Maddox's men had been the aggressors. They painted Eliza as the reason for Cole's uncharacteristic agitation, the whispers of her influence poisoning his judgment and sparking the conflict. It was a masterful, insidious narrative that shifted the blame from Harper's greed to Eliza's very existence. Finally, Reverend Michaels fixed his cold gaze on Eliza. "Miss Carter, do you have anything to say? Do you have any remorse for the chaos your presence has brought upon us?" The entire church held its breath. Cole started to rise, his face a mask of thunderous rage, ready to unleash his fury on them all. But Eliza placed a gentle hand on his arm, her touch both a restraint and a reassurance. She shook her head slightly. "This is mine," her eyes said. She stood alone and walked to the center of the aisle, standing before the council of self-important men. She was not afraid. After facing down Wade Harper's gunslingers, The disapproving glares of a few town elders held no terror for her. "Remorse," she began, her voice perfectly calm and clear, carrying to the furthest corners of the silent church. "No, Reverend, I have no remorse for being the victim of a violent man's ambition. And I have no remorse for accepting the kindness of a good one." She turned her gaze from the council to the townspeople, meeting their eyes one by one. "I have lived in this town my entire life. You have known me since I was a child, but you have never seen me. You have only ever seen the ghost of my father. You looked at me and saw his mistakes, his weaknesses. You decided my story was written before I had the chance to live it." She paused, letting the truth of her words sink in. "When Mr. Maddox offered me a job, he did not see a ghost. He saw a woman who needed work. When he taught my brother to ride, he did not see a sinner's spawn. He saw a boy who deserved a moment of joy. When your hate and your gossip became a weapon in Wade Harper's hands, he did not see a source of division. He saw a human being who deserved to be defended." Her eyes found Mrs. Gable in the crowd. "You speak of reputation, of propriety, but that is not what you truly fear. You fear what you cannot understand. You fear a kindness that asks for nothing in return. You fear a love that doesn't fit into the neat, cruel boxes you have built for yourselves." She turned back to the Reverend and the mayor. Her voice did not rise, but it was filled with an unbreakable strength, a certainty forged in fire and blood. "We are not here today to ask for your acceptance. We are not here seeking your forgiveness for who we are or for the love we share. We do not need your permission to live, and we do not need your blessing to be happy." She delivered the final lines with a quiet, devastating finality that left no room for argument. "We do not need your forgiveness. We choose to live truthfully with each other, and that is a law higher and more righteous than any you can write in this town." She turned, walked back to her seat beside Cole, and sat down. The silence in the church was no longer judgmental. It was awed. She had not defended herself against their charges. She had dismissed the court. She had taken all their petty rules and righteous indignation and shown them for the hollow things they were. Without another word, Cole stood, took her hand, and together they walked out of the church, leaving the town of Dusty Creek to grapple with its own soul. They rode back to the ranch in silence, the sun setting behind them, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple. The anger and tension of the day slowly melted away, replaced by a profound and peaceful quiet. He was not just her protector, and she was not just his charge. They were partners. They had faced down the world together, and they had won. Instead of going to the main house, Cole guided the horses up the familiar trail into the hills. He led her to their hidden oasis, the secret canyon with its green grass and whispering creek. In the soft twilight, the place felt more sacred than ever. It was their sanctuary, the heart of their world. He helped her down from the wagon, his movements careful because of his injured shoulder. He led her to the bank of the creek and turned to face her. In his eyes, she saw none of the hardness of the rancher, none of the fury of the fighter. She saw only a deep, abiding love and a vulnerability that mirrored her own. "When I woke up that morning and you were gone," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "I thought my life was over. I realized in that one god-awful moment that this ranch, my father's legacy, all of it, it's just dirt and cattle. It's nothing. It meant nothing without you." He reached into his coat pocket with his good hand and pulled out a small, roughly made object that glinted in the fading light. It was a ring. It wasn't a delicate piece of jewelry from a shop back east. It was a solid, wide band of silver, polished to a soft sheen but still bearing the faint, unique marks of the hammer that had shaped it. It was simple, strong, and beautiful. "There's a small vein of silver ore on the ridge, not far from here," he said, his gaze fixed on her face. "My father knew about it, but he said it was too small to be worth mining commercially. I dug this out myself, a long time ago. Had it hammered into this, I never knew why I was keeping it." He smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that lit his entire face. "Now I do." He took her left hand, his thumb tracing the lines on her palm. "This ring, it's not from some stranger's shop. It's from this land, our land. It's a part of this place, a part of its heart, just like you are. Eliza, you're the heart of it all." He slowly sank to one knee in the soft green grass, his eyes never leaving hers. The great, powerful Cole Maddox, the king of this territory, knelt before her. "I love you, Eliza Carter. You saved me from more than just a bullet. You saved me from a life of loneliness I didn't even realize I was living. I don't want to be your protector anymore. I want to be your husband. I want to wake up to your face every morning and watch Danny grow up calling me whatever he wants. I want to build a life with you, right here." Tears streamed down Eliza's face, but they were not tears of sorrow or fear. They were tears of a joy so pure and overwhelming it felt like sunshine flooding her soul. "Will you marry me, Eliza?" he asked, his voice thick with hope. "Will you be my wife and choose me forever?" She couldn't speak. She could only nod, a frantic, repeated motion, laughing and crying all at once. He slid the solid, cool weight of the silver ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. It felt as if it had been made for her from the beginning of time. He rose and pulled her into his arms, his good arm wrapping around her, holding her as if he would never let her go. And in the heart of their hidden canyon, under a sky full of emerging stars, the outcast daughter of a gambler and the wounded cowboy king sealed their choice, not with words, but with a long, profound kiss that promised a lifetime of sunrises. Part 8. A New Dawn in the West. They were married not in the judgmental silence of the Dusty Creek Church, but in the heart of their own sanctuary. The wedding took place in the hidden canyon, with the gentle murmur of the creek as their choir and a canopy of ancient oak leaves as their cathedral ceiling. There was no preacher to speak of sin, no mayor to talk of civic duty. Their only officiant was the grizzled old circuit judge, a man who had seen too much of the West to be shocked by anything, and who cared more for the truth in a person's eyes than the rumors on their lips. Their witnesses were the only community that mattered, the loyal Maddox Ranch hands, their hats held respectfully in their hands. Martha, the kind homesteader who had sheltered Danny, her face beaming, and Danny himself, standing as Cole's best man, his chest puffed out with a solemn pride that was almost comical. Eliza wore a simple cream-colored dress she had sewn herself, and in her hair, she wore a crown of the same wild blue and yellow flowers that dotted the canyon floor. Cole, his arm now healing but still in a sling, watched her walk toward him, and the look in his eyes was one of such profound adoration it silenced the entire small gathering. He had faced down gunfighters and stampedes without flinching, but the sight of this one woman, walking toward him to be his wife, undid him completely. They exchanged simple vows, promises not of fairy tale perfection, but of steadfast partnership. They promised to be each other's shelter in the storm, to honor the truths they had found in one another, and to build a life on the foundation of the love that had saved them both. When the judge pronounced them man and wife, Cole dipped his head and kissed her, a long, deep kiss that was a seal on their new world, and the hardened cowboys around them let out a whoop of joy that echoed off the canyon walls. Life in Dusty Creek did not change overnight. When Cole and Eliza Maddox rode into town for the first time as a married couple, the silence was still there. The stares still followed them. Mrs. Gables still looked at Eliza as if she were something unclean that had been tracked in on a boot heel, but the venom had lost its sting. It could no longer touch them. They were wrapped in the unassailable armor of their shared happiness. They would enter the general store, and Cole would rest his good hand on the small of his wife's back, a simple, proprietary gesture that dared anyone to utter a word against her. And no one did. They had won, not by converting their enemies, but by rendering their opinions utterly irrelevant. The fire left scars on the land, black patches on the high summer pastures that looked like bruises. But land, like the heart, has a remarkable capacity to heal. Cole and Eliza worked side by side to bring it back to life. They rode for hours, planning where to reseed, how to divert water to the scorched earth. In the shared labor, the ranch became as much hers as it was his. She was no longer just his bookkeeper. She was his partner in every sense of the word. Her sharp mind for figures now applied to the grander calculus of seasons and herds. The biggest change, however, was in the people. The attack had cost Cole several hands, and more had drifted away. Spooked by the violence, he needed to hire more men. One afternoon, a family came to the ranch, their wagon old and rickety. The father's face etched with the desperation of a long, fruitless search for work. His name was Thomas, and he confessed that he had been let go from a ranch further south because his youngest son was sickly, and the owner saw the boy as a potential liability. The old Cole might have turned them away, but he looked at the worried father, at the tired mother clutching her child, and he saw a reflection of Eliza and Danny. He saw people cast out for circumstances beyond their control. He looked at Eliza, and she simply nodded, her eyes full of a quiet understanding. "There's a cottage on the east slope," Cole said to Thomas. "It's small, but it's sturdy. The work is hard, but the pay is fair. Your wife can help in the kitchen, if she's a mind to. Your son will have fresh air and good milk. He'll grow strong here." The man's look of stunned, tearful gratitude was a revelation. From that day forward, the Maddox Ranch began to change. It became a haven for those the world had discarded. Cole and Eliza hired a family ostracized for their Apache blood, a young man accused of stealing bread in town, an old cowboy whose hands were too gnarled for roping but who knew more about healing sick horses than any doctor. They built a community based not on reputation, but on character, not on the past, but on the promise of a second chance. The ranch flourished as never before, its success a quiet but powerful rebuke to the narrow-minded world of Dusty Creek. Time spooled out, weaving the seasons together. 2 years after the wedding, the black scars on the land had faded to a pale green, then a lush gold. The ranch was more prosperous than ever, its herds larger, its people more loyal. Danny was no longer a small, wiry boy. At 12, he was tall for his age, with the beginnings of his mother's sharp cheekbones and Cole's quiet confidence. He rode as if he had been born in the saddle, his seat easy and natural. He was Cole's shadow, learning not just how to rope and brand, but how to lead with a firm but gentle hand, how to look a man in the eye and see the measure of his soul. Cole had not tried to replace Danny's father, but he had become something more profound, a choice, a role model, the man Danny wanted to become. One day, while mending a fence line, Danny and Cole came across a boy from a neighboring ranch who had lost a calf. The boy, a few years older than Danny, recognized him. "You're the Carter kid, ain't you?" he sneered, "the one whose PA swung from a rope." Danny stiffened, the old shame a ghost at his shoulder, but then he glanced at Cole, who was watching him, his expression calm and steady. Cole didn't move to intervene. This was Danny's battle to fight. Danny took a breath and turned back to the boy. "My father was Abraham Carter," he said, his voice even. "My mother was Mary Carter. This is Cole Maddox, my sister's husband. My name is Daniel Maddox. Now, do you need help finding that calf, or are you just going to stand there talking about ghosts?" The older boy, taken aback by his calm defiance, just mumbled an apology and retreated. Cole rode up beside Danny and clapped him on the shoulder, a rare and powerful gesture of approval. "Well said, son," was all he said. But in that moment, Danny felt 10 feet tall. The cycle of shame had been broken. The love between Cole and Eliza deepened, settling from the fire of its desperate beginnings into the steady, sustaining warmth of a hearth. They were a perfect balance, his quiet strength and her fierce compassion. They were partners, friends, and lovers. Their life a testament to the idea that in the harshest of lands, the most beautiful things can grow. One morning, just before the sun crested the horizon, Eliza woke and slipped out of bed. She walked to the window of their bedroom, which looked out over the vast expanse of the ranch. The world was painted in the soft, bruised colors of pre-dawn, the air cool and full of promise. A moment later, she felt Cole's presence behind her. He wrapped his arms around her waist, his good arm strong and sure, and rested his chin on her shoulder, his warmth seeping into her. Together, they watched as the first sliver of the sun ignited the eastern sky, sending out rays of liquid gold that chased the shadows from the plains. The light touched the greening pastures where the fire had been, touched the roofs of the cottages where the outcast families slept peacefully, touched the distant hills where their secret canyon lay. It was their kingdom, reborn and redefined. A world built not on power, but on love. Eliza leaned her head back against his chest, the solid, steady beat of his heart a comfort against her back. She thought of the terrified, shamed girl she had been, a ghost in a dusty town, and the strong, loved woman she was now. She thought of the incredible, impossible journey that had brought them to this peaceful sunrise. "You chose me," she whispered, her voice full of a quiet awe that had never truly faded. "Over your reputation, your legacy, over the whole world." Cole tightened his embrace, his lips brushing against her hair. He looked out at the golden land, at the home they had built, at the future stretching out before them, bright and endless as the prairie sky. He thought of the choice he had made in the darkness of his office, the choice he had sealed with a bullet in his shoulder and a ring of simple silver. It had never really been a choice at all. It was the only truth his soul had ever known. He answered her, his voice a low, certain vow spoken to the rising sun, to the land, to her, and to himself. Chose her forever. Thank you for listening to our story. We'd love to know where you're listening from, so please leave a comment below to connect with us and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to our channel, Wild West Night. Give this video a like, and consider hitting the hype button to help more people discover and enjoy our stories.